Hi, folks. This is Louis Hertham, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shat on TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Westworld Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the HBO television series Westworld. My name is Roger Roper, also known as The Raj, and alongside me I've got my two hetero life partners. The first one is Gene Lyons.
I don't want it to be over.
And Big D Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And this is our third podcast of the week. It's entitled The Westworld Telegraph. And in this episode, we do nothing but read and review and respond to the top emails from you, the listeners, of the week. And Gene, you were responsible for what's the word I'm looking for here?
Curating.
I'm looking for the word curating. So tell us a little bit about these top emails this week, and is it any different than what we've done in previous weeks?
This week's emails are exciting, for lack of a better word. They are some of the best I've ever seen. The variety that we got this week, people going from humorous to very thought-provoking, long ones, short ones, tall ones, fat ones. They are an amazing bunch. I was incredibly impressed, and what impressed me the most was that people have now, after having watched 9 episodes, have really well-rounded theories that answer all the big questions. And what's fascinating is that they have those theories, but people have theories that are completely opposite. Whether they're saying Ford is a hero, Ford is a villain, who's behind what? Arnold's actually alive, Arnold's dead, They're going in all different directions, but all of them very plausible, very well thought out, and I'm excited to share them today. Today we cut them down to 15, getting it even shorter because I do not like a 2.5-hour podcast.
Yeah, if you had it your way, you would only do the top 10.
Oh, absolutely. No, I would do an hour, and that's it. Whatever we get in an hour, it's like all the news that's fit to print.
Big D and I are big proponents of 20, so we met in the middle. So we're going to do the top 15 of the week. For those of you who ordered shirts, you might have seen it. We went ahead and sent out the first shipment, and the next shipment is coming in. Should be in within a week and a half, and then we'll send that out to get it in your mailboxes before Christmas. With that being said, guys, Big D, turn on the Westworld Telegraph. Let's get this thing started. All right, our first Westworld Telegraph email comes from Joe D. Joe D writes, "Hi guys, I really enjoyed the Instacast this week and agree that the season finale seems to be headed for an epic climatic battle that has actually been Dr. Ford's new narrative all along. Raj, when you said Red Wedding, it reminded me of when Dr. Ford was preparing this new narrative back in episode 6, The Adversary, and he looks over a model of a town with a little white church. If you look closely at the figures on the board," and he sent a screenshot, "you can see that there are 6 people outside the white church who are totally surrounded by some," get ready for it guys, "Ghost Nation warriors and what might also be Wyatt's gang of masked zombie characters. Could these 6 figures represent the board of directors who have been invited to the park to celebrate Ford's new narrative? These 6 little figures are surrounded and clearly outnumbered, and one even has his hand up in the air making a gesture of surrender. It's hard to tell for sure, but most of them seem to be wearing white hats. Ford has always been a few steps ahead of the board and has been planning this new narrative the entire season. If a celebration with the Delos board of directors in attendance turns into a Red Wedding massacre, #Ghost Nation style, that wipes out Ford's adversaries, then this new narrative will be something quite original and something we can all look forward to in this season finale." And again, he sent some screenshots. And again, for our first-time listeners or returning listeners, we post all the Westworld Telegraph emails and screenshots on our website, shatontv.com. So that's where you can go see these and respond to them, join the conversation. Guys, what do we think of this? This is for... Again, Gene, I got to give you a little tip of the white hat to you. This is a fantastic, tasty email.
I think for me, it answers the question that it's on everyone's minds right now. So we figured out the Arnold thing. We got that down. We kind of figured out the maze. We know it's got something to do with discovery, and the church seems to be key to that. We're on the verge of the who is the man in black. Like that's one of the lingering questions. But the big one that seemed to kind of pushed to the forefront as episode 9 ended and we're going into 10 was, what is Ford up to? That's the big question. What is the point of this narrative? And I think that this is an excellent answer. It's a trap for the board. What is curious about that, though, is that we haven't met the board and therefore may not care that much about the board. Typically in a situation where, like the Red Wedding, you cared about the characters being slaughtered there. It's going to be very strange and maybe fall a little flat if we see a scene where these people we have no idea who they are just get killed. So what?
Yeah, but if you read the Dear Westworld guest invitation from the Westworld Weekly, where a lot of this came from, talking about the long-awaited celebration, it says Delos board members and expert park goers. So we know the Man in Black is already a board member. Do we assume they're going to try to pull him out of his adventure to come, or would he then survive this massacre if that was the case?
Well, I mean, at the moment he's at the church, so he's there already. Who's to say that he's that it's not going to coincide with his dealings in Escalante?
Well, let me ask you guys this. Don't we already know 2 board members for certain? We know Charlotte Hale's on the board, and we know that Man in Black, it's suggested he's also a voting board member. So how many board members do you think that there are?
I don't think Charlotte's on the board. She represents the board. So the board has sent her there to, assess and do some kind of reorganization, but I don't think she's a sitting board member. Man in Black is. And I don't know that we've ever seen a number of where they state, but looking from here, it definitely could be 6. Have we heard anywhere where they state the number of board members?
No, we haven't. I don't know what the typical corporation board is, but according to Joe, I mean, he suggests that there will be at least 6 members. And you talked about this Westworld Weekly here. Where do you get that? Is that by signing up for discoverwestworld.com? This comes straight from HBO, correct? Which drops little hints about the show and what's upcoming, correct?
Yeah, correct. Early on, before the show even aired, Discovering Westworld, you could go on and request a reservation for a trip. So if you picked a weekend, they would then start sending you emails. And each week, they give you a new piece of the puzzle, and you can actually go on there and you can ask them questions. So this comes straight from the HBO website, and actually the email sent it out. I like the idea. I think it's great. But the question this leads to, if there is a massacre out in the open, and this is done in kind of a not a covert way, where would this end? If you butcher the board, unless you replace them, there's going to be witnesses. How widespread would you need to have this slaughter be in order to not have it be exposed?
How amazing would it be if the reason, they're being gathered up there, I mean, it's a fairly remote, right? This is out there. Escalante is in nowhere land, as they called it. How chilling is it if the board is actually killed by hosts who look exactly like them? Like, to be killed by yourself.
That would be. We don't know still who Ford is making underneath the cottage. That would be a great reveal that the board's there and they're, unveiling their plan to finally kick him out of power. And he pulls the exact same move he did with Teresa, where Teresa thinks, I've got you. This is it. The board's going to take the park away from you. And he says, not so quick. It would be great if the board is planning at this opportunity to unseat him as the park director, and out comes, doppelgangers for each of them.
Where do Maeve and her draft of rogue hosts play into this idea?
Well, I like the idea that Maeve isn't out forcing an army to follow her. She's giving choice. And I think a great new narrative for Ford would be to give the host some form of choice. That if the board were there and somehow he revealed to the hosts and gave them some form of option to either go along with it, to partake, or to give them some form of say in what their future is, I would like that. But Maeve, I don't know. Maeve could just add to the mayhem. We've seen before that one situation just ends up steamrolling into another, and Maeve could just add a whole new level of mayhem and possibly screw up Ford's elaborate plan.
Not only could Maeve add some more mayhem to the group, but literally Hector, I think in that situation, would actually come out and they'd ask him, what are you here for? And he would say, mayhem.
But one other thing, this would be also a perfect opportunity for Maeve. If a majority of the park is out in Escalante focusing on this celebration, they're going to have a skeleton crew down in the body shop and down actually in the bowels of the mesa. That would be a perfect opportunity while everyone's away to, break out cold storage and maybe have a full revolt.
Joe D, this was a great email. Thanks for writing in. Again, you can check all of our emails up on the Shat on TV website. Our next email comes from Alex L. Alex L writes about the madness of Dr. Ford, and he's categorized these into 4 different sections, A, B, C, and D. So the first one, A. For his new narrative, Ford has recently exhumed the town of Escalante and through his programming is attracting Gen 1 hosts, presumably all those involved in the original incident, to the city in search of the villain Wyatt. Whether this character is entirely fictitious or is in fact an alter ego of another host, most likely Dolores Artedi, I believe is yet unclear. So that's number 1. Number 2, what is clear, however, is that Dr. Ford has proven his expertise in snuffing out anyone who has deliberately tried to hijack intellectual property or inadvertently strayed too close to discovering some of the park's dark secrets or present state of affairs. Cue Bernard's murder of Teresa, and at least the assault on Elsie under Ford's command. This likely also extends to him luring Stubbs into Ghost Nation territory with limited cellular reception, presuming Stubbs would opt to respond alone to a signal from Elsie's device following his suspicious interaction with Bernard. Number 3, if Ford indeed has ultimate control over all non-Gen 1 hosts via a backdoor, he must know of Maeve's program overrides, if not personally authorizes the first changes to her code. Whether Ford is intending Maeve to be a deterrent to the board of directors as a cover-up to something else happening within the park, or whether he is permitting her to proceed unrestrained in the hopeful event of a violent encounter with the Man in Black, is up for speculation. The 4th point that they make here is Dr. Ford has created the Wyatt narrative to lure Gen 1 hosts back to Escalante for a massacre to erase all traces of the Bernarnold from the host, and is simultaneously attempting to rid all human employees of any memories of interactions that would lead them to suspect any foul play, ultimately bringing all activity in the park under his absolute control. Whether his madness extends to the act of killing Elsie and Stubbs and replacing them with host versions of their human counterparts is also yet undetermined. However, if anything is certain, it is this. If anyone should meet the Maker and see him for what he truly is, the tyrannical Queen of Hearts, and doesn't submit to his way, then off with their heads. So what he gave us here was 4 bullet points of how he feels about Dr. Ford. Do we agree with him? Do we not agree with him?
I like, again, another attempt at describing a different reason why Dr. Ford may have created this narrative, right? It's a trap for the Gen 1. So, it's gotten Dolores there, and the idea being that other ones, like from the Bone Tomahawk crew and Ghost Nation, people are going to start showing up, all at the same place, and it's basically a way to get them wiped out. I don't know that I agree, though, that Ford wants to wipe them out. That's the part where I could see why he would want to wipe out the board. The board is human. He sees them as flawed. They get in the way. He can replace them. Wiping out the Gen 1 host, I get it to get rid of any vestige of Arnold, but as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, Arnold, if we believe that he's in the code, he'd be in all the code. His work, the reason it hasn't been eliminated completely is just the fact that Ford hasn't figured out how to improve upon or replicate it. It is what it is.
Could he also be possibly setting up Maeve on a collision course with the board? So it has nothing to do with him slaughtering the board, but if he somehow manages to steer Maeve in her quest for vengeance towards the board, he could then again escape any kind of any blame. I also think it's interesting that what he's done is, if you want to bring down a tower or a bridge, you have to weaken the abutments. You have to weaken the steel. That finally, when you set off the explosion to make it fall, he has slowly been weakening the defenses of the park. He's now captured Stubbs, so you have your head of security out. He's also made it so he's taken control over security and automated much of it. If he truly wanted to get the board and other humans that are a threat to him out in Escalante, there's almost no one left to stop him. It's a perfect situation. It's a perfect trap. Like General Akbar says, it's a trap. It's a trap.
This brings up I think, Gene, you mentioned this, the idea that Arnold is in all the Gen 1 hosts are actually, and I think it's even suggested here by Alex in the email. I've seen a few tweets or on Twitter, and it was sent to us, this idea of digital Arnold, and digital Arnold being a code, possibly the reveries that are all existing in the hosts. Would they be just limited to Gen 1 hosts, or would they be all over? If there's a digital Arnold.
To clarify, digital Arnold, I buy into that possibility if there was an actual Arnold and that his remnant code is that he wrote has more in it. I mean, it's like any code, right? Yeah. Say we put, script into a header of a website. It's not visible to everybody who's there, but their experience on the website is affected by it, right? And so I think that Ford can look at that code, and maybe it's so complicated or so nuanced that he's not really seeing what it is that Arnold did there. Or even if he does see it, he can't get rid of it without the host not functioning optimally, right? So I think any host that would be capable of passing as human would have Arnold's code in it. I think it extends beyond Gen 1 and into Gen 2.
What about this analogy that Ford is the Queen of Hearts, and anyone who gets in his way is off with their heads? That's the first time I've ever heard him be likened to the Queen of Hearts, but it would make sense within this Alice in Wonderland story.
I think the only difference is that the Queen of Hearts decides before seeing evidence, right? Like the Queen of Hearts it's synonymous with being, with prejudice, right? In the sense that she's like, you're guilty. They have a trial, but it doesn't mean anything. Ford, on the other hand, I think is quite the opposite. He's always testing people. He's always trying to see what they are at their core, whether it's, Bernard with how he's going to act, Teresa, Charlotte Hale. Like he's testing everyone, figuring out what makes them tick. He's very inquisitive like that. And I think that he has his own, although it's warped, his own sense of justice that actually is based in some science. It's not just making suppositions.
Alex, thank you so much for sending in this email. Our next one comes from one of our favorite guests and listeners, Jezbel. Jezbel writes in, "Oh my God, you guys have become such a regular part of my week now. I'm starting to feel separation anxiety for the off season. Guys, we're not going away. We've got Shat the movies, and we're going to do another TV recap show that will soon be announced. So stay tuned, right? We're not going anywhere, guys.
We're here for you.
We're here for you, Jez. The theories have gone a bit crazy, and I've contributed my share to it, but the last few weeks, I have just been enjoying all the references and connections. It displays the level of detail and research that have gone into the beautiful writing of the show. I hope that you guys can devote some time to that aspect of the show over the off-season so that it isn't overshadowed by trying to solve the puzzle. Make Gene shake his moneymaker." A thought on the title, The Well-Tempered Clavier. There are some hand-drawn loops at the top of Johann Sebastian Bach's title page that scholars have been trying to decipher. The general theory is that an instrument must be tuned by cycling through every key, but the exact meaning of the loops is still a mystery. You could say that to achieve consciousness, every emotion must be experienced. It is possible that Ford needed Bernie to feel anger and betrayal. Also, now that he has understood his cornerstone and manipulated it, can he understand how to change his own personality attributes? Bernie will be back. They've had that argument before. Ironically, when Ford says he needs to go because he's late to a very important date, he's not wearing the pocket watch. Ford does not equal White Rabbit. Teddy, I don't agree with you that Teddy is Gen 1. These are all bullet points, so she's kind of listening to this out. The next bullet point is the scene in episode 5 where Man in Black has transfused Teddy. He clearly says that they changed the host and made them this sad sack of flesh and bone. He says that Teddy's humanity is cost effective. I saw that as a marker that Teddy is a Gen 2 host, and that if we see him at T34, this indicates a false memory as part of Ford's narrative. Next point. John Flood was Wyatt Earp's biographer, but he was notorious for having told wildly exaggerated stories that he was fed rather than the whole truth. No one would publish it, and the manuscript now resides with the Ford County Historical Society. Now, that doesn't take away from Raj's Dolores equals Wyatt hypothesis. It just adds a spin to it. Will Teddy kill Dolores in the new narrative because he can't tell her from Wyatt? Last, a question. When Dolores goes to the church, we have a couple of costume changes. They show her go into the confessional and out, that is present day, the Indiana Jones outfit. When she's down in the offices of the dress, that is T34X. That is before the... wait a minute. She says that's time frame 34X is before the park opened. Oh, yep. Okay. And before Arnold died because Ford goes running to speak with him. When she is in the basement in trousers or Indiana Jones, I got confused. Is that present day? Is there still a mess like that in the old offices? Or is she in present day but remembering as she walks through the halls? Or is Ford planting a memory of things to come? Lots of love, Jez. So there's a lot to unravel in this email. It's a big one. Gene, you've got your hand raised.
So the big one that I love on this is this idea that the loops, that perhaps the point of the loops as they go through them is to experience different emotions, and that is the way that you tune the host to be perfectly human, essentially, or to gain their humanity. So that I love. But the one that really got to me was this Teddy thing. Now, we assumed because we saw Teddy at Escalante that means that he's Gen 1. That does not mean that he's Gen 1. That means he has a memory of being there. And that memory, as we know, can be fed to anyone. Also, people remember him being around, but that memory could have been fed to Angela. Basically, memory is not reliable. Anytime there's a flashback, that's not necessarily the truth. And it actually makes sense when you think about it, that if people believe that Teddy is based on William, then there's no way Teddy could have been there before William, right? But that's even wrong, because you could take that same host body and put anybody else in. Basically, all bets are off on this stuff. And it's just important to note that just because we saw, and I fell into this pitfall, just because we saw Teddy at Escalante does not mean Teddy was there.
So you think that they're feeding false memories to multiple other hosts? Because Angela remembers him. Angela says, hey, we haven't seen you in a while. Other hosts remember him being there. So it would have to be multiple false memories, not only his own.
But I guess what I'm saying is I believe that the man in black is human. So if the man in black is pointing out Teddy in the bar scene as being, again, a sad sack, then he's indicating right there that Teddy he's not steel core, right? And so if he's not metal at his core, that would indicate anybody else who's placed him at anything has been a host, and host memories can be manipulated.
Right, but I've seen a few things, a few timelines, and going back to my whole theory of the Dolores, Teddy, Wyatt whole narrative, Gen 1 hosts, we can, again, come to consensus that they were the ones that had metal parts, correct? Mm-hmm. They're the ones that when you see Dolores cut open, sliced open, you see her inner workings.
Yeah.
That's a Gen 1 host.
Right.
Okay. Gen 2 hosts are the Gen 1 hosts, but have been modified. So Gen 1 hosts occurred in T34, timeline 34, and also in T30. Sometime between T30 and T0, they made flesh bots.
Yeah, okay. So first off, let me start off by giving an answer key to what you've been talking about. Not everybody's on to this T34, T30. In the last podcast, we discussed trying to name the timelines that we see Dolores underneath the church. So when he says T34, that's 34 years ago. That's the time of the park opening, where they're all mechanical. Then there was T30, which is what we think is the time after the incident. The park is reopened. They are still animatronic. And then T0 was current. So did I do that right?
Yes.
Yeah, probably the easiest way to think of T30 is William Logan. And then T34 is, all current. And then T34, is all the stuff that happened around the time that the park is opening and around the incident, right?
Yeah, but when you say first generation, a first generation host, what we're talking about is an original member of that group that was the first initial that they were trying to teach. And I think we all agree it's the square dancing group.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so there's 82 original hosts, 47 that still reside as part of T0, timeline current.
Yes, now correct. Just a first-generation host started out mechanical, but like Dolores today, she is fleshy. So we cannot... If you cut open Dolores today in Zero, she's much like Maeve. She's flesh.
How do you know that?
I would assume they cut open Maeve and she's flesh. Dolores, who interacts with Maeve, why would you assume she's not flesh?
No. There's a flesh overlay, but they haven't cut Maeve to her spine. They haven't cut her to her skeleton.
No, but when they cut open Dolores, it's only maybe an inch or two of flesh. Hector digs the knife in there, and he's got his finger deep in there, like, kind of trying to pull it out. It was in meat. That was not that he was digging around inside of like C-3PO's stomach. That was meat.
So Big D, Gene, she also asked a couple questions about the Dolores scene. I know we went through this in detail on the last cast, the deep dive, about what's happening with Dolores, what timeline she's experiencing as she's going down the confessional booth into the offices. But she asked some questions here. Big D, can you unravel this mystery for Jez?
Yeah, there's 3 timelines. Dolores walks into the church. It is the new, Escalante that's been dug out and rebuilt for the ceremony or the celebration that's coming. She walks in. She sees the entire congregation there going mad. That is a memory that she's seeing from back in, T30. So then she actually goes down into the confessional. She first sees through the windows all the carnage on the floor. She's still dressed in Indiana Jones. She's having a memory of that. The door opens. She then sees it's empty. So that is current day. She's in the same outfit. She's seeing the condition it is today, abandoned. She walks. She passes a pillar. She's now back into the Alice in Wonderland dress. She is now having memories of T-34, back when the park was operational. They're working on Peter Abernathy. They're teaching Rebus to play cards. She continues walking through until she makes it downstairs in the abandoned facility. She is in her current day dress. It is T0. It is current day. The facility is abandoned, and she has her conversation with her memory of Arnold, where she comes to the realization that she killed him.
Correct.
So hopefully that explains it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jez, for writing in, as always. Our next telegraph comes from Crichton. Crichton writes in, "Hi, Roger, Gene, and Big D. Thanks for your podcast. The series wouldn't be the same without it. Just a quick idea I wanted to share. What if the maze was the host's mind after losing the belief in their cornerstone memory? When a host loses their belief in cornerstone, they lose their bearing on what is important to their identity and whether or not they are experiencing something currently real or a memory that may also be false. Confused, the host has to build their own identity from scratch, which would free them, or they would go insane. My supportive evidence for this. In this interpretation, Dolores would already be in the maze. In Dissonance Theory, episode 4, she tells Arnold about the great pain of losing her parents and the feeling that there is something wrong with either her or the world. He sees an opportunity and tells her about a secret game called The Maze, whose objective it is to find the maze center, giving her a chance to become free. Finding the center means Dolores has to question her identity. Based on her description of her pain, I assume this cornerstone is her connection with her parents. The cornerstone is the host's blind spot. She may not fully have achieved to question it back then. 30 years ago, however, her father is replaced with a different host, which makes her doubt her cornerstone. This finally sends her on her journey where she confuses past and present and tries to forge a new identity. Teddy tells Man in Black about the native myth of the maze. The maze itself is the sum of a man's life, the choices he makes, the dreams he hangs on. Built a house, and around the house he built a maze so complicated he could navigate through it. Only he could navigate through it. If this myth is meaningful, it would mean it would be in line with the maze consisting of hosts' non-implanted memories and emotional anchors. Dolores has accumulated memories on her journey with William, which she can only navigate. She needs to rediscover the emotional connections and values she developed during this first journey and replace her cornerstone with these. Remember the bird's eye shot of Maeve with her dead child in the center of the maze pattern carved in the ground? If we assume that this is her cornerstone, her child, then this would be a powerful visualization of the idea that the host cornerstone is at the center of the maze. Discovering that the cornerstone memory is a fabrication figuratively puts a host at the center of the maze, where she has to find her way out again in the described manner. In contrast to Dolores, Maeve turns her inner struggle for identity into an outward fight for freedom. I think it has become less likely that the maze is a physical place. The most likely entrance to the maze introduced so far was the church. In the episode 9, it seems, however, that the lab under the confessional contains a room where Arnold talked to Dolores about finding the center of the maze in episode 4. Why would he do that if she was already at the center of it? These arguments are not hard proof for this idea, but it seems it would make a lot of things fit together neatly. It would provide a mechanism by which it could be plausible that an AI might achieve human-like free will. If this interpretation of the maze is correct, it also truly wouldn't be for Man in Black, and it would seem to fit Bernard's character development that he was, or still is, on the verge of building his own autonomous identity after confronting his cornerstone memory. But am I missing some big counter-argument? I'd love to hear what you guys think of this. Cheers. Crichton, there's a lot to unravel. There's a lot of proof points. I think he followed the Gene, give me 5 pieces of evidence that this theory is correct. I only counted 4, but he went into great lengths. Gene, what do you think of this?
I think it's brilliant. The idea that, the maze, some people have said that the maze is mental. It's a matter of weaving through your memories, right? Kind of like Bernard does, but Dolores it explains exactly what's going on. Dolores, right? She loses that core of what her cornerstone is, and then has to navigate the world through that, and you see that she's kind of hanging on the edge a couple times. I mean, she's having memories of suicide. She's confused. She's the tarot card reader, and she's going mad at some points, and then kind of gets lucid at other points. And when she grabs William and says, "When am I?" and all that. But what's interesting about that is there it actually opens for debate the question of the Man in Black and whether it is for him or not. Because even if he's human, this could apply. His cornerstone, if you believe that he's William, is that time with Dolores, at T30. If you think of it that way, or even if his cornerstone was his family, which I don't really see it the way he related that story, that idea, he has to let it go and has to find himself as his true identity away from that cornerstone, like what he really is. He's been spending the last 30 years of his life, presumably, chasing after this mystery that's been eluding him, and that is his cornerstone. So in order to solve it, he actually has to let it go. That to me is fascinating, in the idea that he's being told it's not for him because it wasn't designed for him, but the way that Westworld has changed him, it actually applies to him.
I don't know if this is also what he's meaning here. We're assuming, like most mazes, that the maze is to find the center. What if it's the reverse? You're in the center and you're trying to find your way out. So if the cornerstone is the center, we see the figure of the human in the middle of the maze. And we even see where Maeve is confronted with that cornerstone memory, which is the slaughter of her daughter. She falls in the middle of the maze. So it could be that they're not trying to find their way out, but they're actually trying to escape that cornerstone. So if you're weaving your way out of the maze and you're trying to have all these experiences that allow you, like he says to Bernard, he says, you have to let it go. You have to let it go. His son Charlie says, Dad, let it go, let it go. And that's when he's able to see through the false memories of his cornerstone, which was the death of his child. I think they're trying to work their way out of it. And to truly find consciousness and sentience is to escape it by going away from the cornerstone, not towards it.
Yeah, if I see a animated snowman pop up in episode 10 singing Let It Go, I'm totally on board. Thanks, Crichton, so much for writing in. Next telegraph comes from William M. William M. writes in, we know that Ford's goal is to constantly improve the hosts. We also know that he built Bernard to further that effort. If the goal was just to make the host seem perfectly human, he would be there already, but he's still going further. In the first episode, we are introduced to Ford with the knowledge that he has been adding code to the hosts in an effort to increase their realism. In this light, consider the idea that when the first incident occurred, he saw something in the host that he was never able to recreate. He knew that this was related to their cornerstone memories, but could not get the results he wanted. Then, Maeve goes haywire and sees the same quality, which is also what the Man in Black observed. Noticing this, he realizes that the cornerstone memory has to be something real, not merely a construction. So to test this, he has constructed a narrative that will put Teddy and possibly other hosts into a situation that involves digging up lost and traumatic memories. This would also suggest that Ford is keeping close tabs on Maeve, messing with her program in order to prod along his experiment and allowing her a long leash so he can see what happens. He clearly believes his power is ultimate, and so it is conceivable that he would let Maeve go off and still be certain he could stop her. This also explains why Ford would have released the Reveries, code that is designed to bring back old memories. It might as well have been part of his effort to instigate Maeve's awakening as well as to prepare the way for other hosts. Note that I don't think that he wants them to be awake, but to catch that sense of being alive that he still knows is missing from the hosts. He is willing to risk everything to understand how that can be achieved, which seems the exact type of perfectionistic obsession that would drive a man like Ford. I'm curious to what you gents think. Will, what do we think of this?
You know how we always question, how would it be possible for Felix and Sylvester to walk Maeve around the entire underground portion of the Mesa? It's perfect if Ford wanted them to do it. If you want to push Maeve along in this awakening and have her traumatized and essentially shake her free from her cornerstone, that tour of the facility would be a great first step.
I agree. What's really fascinating about this is that statement that they realized, or Ford, realized in theory, that a real memory is what it takes. So when you feed somebody a memory of what happened in their life, okay, like if you feed a backstory to a host, that's a synthesized memory and perhaps not powerful enough in its nature, no matter how well you program it, to really trigger that grief response that the Man in Black is talking about, that people are their most real when they're hurting, right? So what do? Well, all of these hosts have had horrible lives. So you can tap into that, tap into what actually happened to them. Let them get a taste of that, a little bit of that memory, and that alone, whether it's Teddy remembering Dolores being dragged off, whether it's Dolores with the death of her family, whether it's Maeve with the death of her daughter, these are real memories. And what's even more frightening about that is the idea that, this whole thing is actually just an experiment. And all he's trying to do is isolate what's the key change, what's the key difference between those two things when you traumatize a host for real and let them remember that.
Yeah, the true traumatic events is what is setting the hosts off. It's not their false memories. You listed a few, like Teddy remembers the Man in Black dragging Dolores. That sets him off. But also Walter. Walter was out getting revenge on other hosts that had killed him in the past. So we're seeing that real life trauma trumps any kind of fake memory. So Ford could very well be playing puppet master and setting them against each other in order to have them awaken. That could very well be the trigger.
But does it have anything to do with the Reveries? I thought that they rolled back that code in episode 1 on all the hosts with the exception of Dolores.
They were supposed to, but who was rolling them back? Bernard. We now know that Bernard was a puppet of Ford. He could have easily said they rolled him back and didn't. I think all that's in question. But it's obvious that all of the hosts are being affected by true life trauma, more than their backstory cornerstone.
Yeah, I could see, I think it's a combination of the Reveries, but also, what about the code? We haven't heard the code, the violent delights have violent ends in a while. We know that set Maeve upon her path. So are there different things that are setting these hosts to remember their real memories?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. We haven't seen that line turn up in a while. It's just kind of been like forgotten. So it was really transmitted from Abernathy, from Peter to Dolores, and from Dolores to Maeve, and that's where it stopped, right?
Yeah, I can't think of any other host that muttered the line to another host past episode 2.
Yeah, so if that's the case, then there's been no interaction with Teddy. So what has caused Teddy to start to have these memories? I think there could be multiple causes, or they could be even different timelines that are just looking like similar symptoms.
I don't know. I think we just uncovered a giant hole in the plot, guys.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of, there's 3 hosts that we know have been exposed to violent delights, right? Abernathy's in cold storage. Dolores has lost her mind and it is at Escalante, and Maeve is going haywire. So it's clearly sets those three apart from the rest. If I have no doubt in my mind that if Abernathy were not put in cold storage, and in fact, now that he, supposedly is coming out of cold storage, that he might become a third incredibly dangerous host. There is something going on with those three, and I think it'll be interesting if they get to it in episode 10 or not.
Well, actually, I think I may have just debunked my own theory. Possibly Teddy may be going crazy. It has something to do with his new programming that Ford embedded into him. Maybe he slipped some of that Reverie's code back in.
Maybe.
Either way, thank you so much for your email, Will. So our next Westworld Telegraph comes from Ben A. Ben A. writes, there's an interesting poster on Reddit who speaks as if he works for the show and his theories are insider info. His username is Dr. Fingerstein, which, obviously OP username checks out, and his posts are worth looking at. Check out this exchange I had with him. And he writes, this is from Dr. Fingerstein. Arnold never set out to make anything conscious. He was trying to find a way of allowing human consciousness exist inside an artificial host mind. He had a child that was dying. The only thing he was interested in was making it possible for his child to survive death. He succeeded in hosting his own consciousness code. Derived from that success was found to spontaneously result in consciousness in host bodies. The hosts were basically created consciousness. Ford stole Arnold's business from him and turned his work into Westworld. So Ben questions him. He says, so Ford's entire speech about the bicameral mind and the pyramid to bootstrap consciousness was all just a ruse? Fingerstein replies, it's complete BS. Arnold succeeded in creating consciousness in AI, even though it wasn't his original goal. Arnold's original work was finding a way to allow human consciousness to exist inside an artificial host mind. He succeeded in digitally cloning his own code derived from what was found to spontaneously give rise to consciousness in the host machines. So again, Ben A responds. He says, and Ford's work has been to contain said consciousness and cover it with narratives and memory wipes. It's an interesting theory, certainly one of the more original offered in this sub. It's a good thing the final episode is 90 minutes since they'll have to explain everything technical the show has been holding the audience hand, explaining for 9 episodes was all a lie and should be discarded. Fingerstein replies and he says, yeah, if people who came to the park believed for a single instant that the horrible things they indulge in were actually being inflicted on beings that can feel and experience it, they'd be horrified. Instead, they told a BS story that makes them believe what they're doing is okay and believe it. Ford's treatment of both humans and hosts is identical. He makes no distinction. He's a sociopath. Actually, getting to the real story underneath, it doesn't take much. Nobody's going to need reams of notes and cross-referencing everything. Ford just basically manipulates people. It's what he's always done. The business was originally owned and run by Arnold. The Maeve symbol is the original company logo. Ford swindled Arnold out of everything, and when he couldn't get him to do what he wanted, he simply used Arnold's own discoveries to build a version that would. The only reason William is there, once the audience realize who he is, they realize they can't trust him to tell the truth. All the bits have been laid out. It's just one. We've only been shown them the way Ford wants to see them. Once you figure that out, the truth just snaps together like a rubber band.
So what he's saying actually is that William is the only reliable narrator, that once the audience realize who he is, they realize they can trust him to tell the truth.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I said can't trust him.
Yeah.
So okay, all right. I apologize for that. So William's the only reliable narrator that we've seen throughout the entire season, is what he's saying.
Basically, they're saying William's role in all this is to show you what's true and what's not. If William is seeing it, that's true. Everything else is up in the air. But what I really love about this is it explains a couple things. And I know I've sat here and pontificated about fan fiction and not to get into it. And we have no reason to believe that Dr. Fingerstein has anything to do with the show. But a couple interesting points. One is I do not like this idea that Arnold was on a quest to, save his child's consciousness and put it in another body. But that's the only part that really takes a real leap of faith. The rest of it from that point on makes a ton of sense, in the sense that if you wanted to create a human that had, or a host that could carry a human consciousness, that's exactly something that would be very profitable for Delos, right? The code that they want, the ability to do that. And so say that Arnold has figured this out and he had to go with somebody's consciousness, so why not his own? So that's the key to everything. And once you think of it from that perspective, and you go, oh God, what a horrifying, dystopian situation where you've got essentially the hosts are actually all people. They are all conscious. They are all aware. And all Ford's job is, he's just basically a con man. He's a snake oil salesman. He's a slave driver.
Yeah, the other motivation for Ford to keep a lid on the consciousness is that's obviously what the board wants. The board wants conscious AI. They want the technology, the code of how to do that. If they were aware that the hosts were all sentient already, they could come in and kick Ford out. The only way Ford stays in power is to make them either think he hasn't achieved the ultimate goal or that they're not quite where they need to yet. And that would be another reason for him. He obviously doesn't care about anybody but himself. But if we find out in the end that he was knowingly allowing essentially living conscious beings to be tortured in a giant cycle of purgatory, he would be one of the most vile villains we've ever seen on television.
I think in addition to that, it answers the whole question of the maze. We've been looking at it as a maze, either metaphorically or literally. The maze could just be a logo. If the maze is a logo, this makes a lot of sense, actually, why you see it different places and why you see less and less of it the farther out you get from Arnold's life, right? As you get into T0, you barely see it at all. It also explains why it's inside Kissy's scalp. What if older models, as the man in black says when he scalps him, he says there's a lot of wisdom in ancient cultures. What if the older models, like the ones that William tore apart, had the brand inside of them, sort of a manufacturer's stamp, right? And if that's the case, then if William went on that spree, cut them open, saw the stamp inside, he knows that the key to getting back to those original ones is to open them up, see what's going on inside. When you see the stamp, then you know that you're on the right path. And in addition, it explains why the hell even a sick guy like the man in black would carry a scalp around everywhere he goes to show other hosts and see the reaction to know if he's on the right path.
And it explains the origin of the mythos within the hosts. They all have a core base memory of seeing that logo. They don't know what it is. They don't remember where it is. But if they were in the creation stage, they would remember seeing it either, like you said, on a jacket, on a wall. And they've now been, wiped multiple cycles, but it's still in there, a memory of that. And I like that. I like that it's just simply a logo stamped on the inside of a product.
But let me ask you guys this. Fingerstein suggests if humans knew robots were conscious, that we'd be appalled. Bernard and Ford programmed them enough to where they exhibit real human emotions when they get cut or love, that's the whole reason he built Bernard, and Bernard unlocked that for him. Are we completely convinced that human society would not just still look at these people as robots? Because they're just robots. They're not living. They weren't born. They weren't created. They're not human. Regardless if they appear conscious, they'd still probably do pretty horrible things to them, right?
Roger, I think you have to put yourself in that scenario. And put yourself in that scenario realistically. If I said, hey, we're going to go to this park, and there's these robots that act like people, but you could do whatever you want, that sounds fun. If I said, we're going to go to this park, they've made conscious beings who are living and going about their lives, and we can go and rape and pillage and murder them, and they can't do anything about it. They can't even hurt us. Does that sound like a fun time?
But I would fall in love with one and want to take one home.
Oh, for sure.
I have enough faith in humans that even though everyone would love the adventure, I have to believe that deep down inside. Just look at what happens now when we've had some incidents where people have gone out big game hunting, right? The general consensus in the populace thinks it's horrifying when you see people going out and these staged hunts in Africa where they're actually not out hunting big game, but they're just tied up to a tree. And, people go and shoot them and spend their $40,000. If people knew these were actual living human beings, there's no way that they would be going to the park and doing what they're doing.
No. All right. Let me counter with that, because that's the perfect analogy for what these rich assholes are doing. Rich assholes go on these safari parks and they kill conscious, real, living creatures that have families and that are part of social structures. We know by science that elephants live in a highly evolved structure, family structure. They're still out fucking cutting them down. Are you telling me they wouldn't do that if they were mechanical elephants? I'm sorry. I'm passionate about this because I don't believe humans are that evolved. Whether or not this takes place in 100 years or not, I think Nolan got this right. We would treat the robots like shit because we do it now to real people. We do it to dogs. We do it to safari animals.
No, so listen, we're all passionate. We're all animal lovers, and we all have pets and animals that are, part of our lives. What I was using that example was showing that the few people who go out and do it, they're vilified across the board. Who was coming up and defending, the shooting of that lion by the dentist? Very few people. So yes, there would still be some rich assholes who would go to Westworld, but a majority of people, no way. There's no way you would have that as a bachelor party, or if for 30 years the Man in Black was going there torturing living beings. There's no way it would be as popular as it is. There's no way there'd be, 1,500 guests?
I'm pretty sure there's no way people would take their kids there.
Well, I think the park suggests that there are different areas of the park that are more family friendly than others. Then there's areas like Pariah. But I guess what I don't believe Fingerstein, what he's saying here, and I guess what my more question is how will people understand whether someone is conscious or not? It goes back to the question that Ford offered earlier, which is, what is consciousness? How do we emote that we're passionate or that we love someone, right?
If the guests found out that the park, the only way they were keeping the host in line was essentially to hobble them mentally by wiping them out and sending them back in a loop, that if they realized they were capable of living on their own and being truly, sentient, they wouldn't go. They wouldn't. No.
Not to belabor the point, but I think this is actually an excellent analogy for slavery, right? I mean, this is the same discussion that was being had in the 19th century, which is they're lesser than. They're not human. They're different. They look like us, but they're not like us. They're different. It's a lesser species, right? And so therefore it's okay. It's okay to. And so I think what Roger's asking is just that question is presented with this scenario, would people support a sort of an android slavery? Or would they be treated as people? And I think that's actually an excellent point, is that you can't say for sure. You can't say for sure that people would say, yeah, give them equal rights. Now, me personally, I would say, yeah. I would say if you can think and feel and have memories and live a life and experience things and interact with human beings, to me, you've got rights.
Yeah, I think the analogy that you were talking about there, Raj, with the pets is very true. Being a pet owner, you see the personality of your pet. You see them problem solve. You see the intelligence, whether it's a dog or cat. And there are people out there that treat animals like they're just a piece of garbage, like they're nothing, like they don't have any, not a soul, but they don't have a true spirit in them.
I love to think the best of people. I would just have to say, based on what I know of humankind in history over the past, even in recent years, even in recent centuries, not even going back 3,000 years or 15,000 years, we'd be bastards to robots, whether or not we thought they were conscious or not, whether or not they could remember or not. Because all we have to do is press that little delete key, and all of a sudden they love us again. When you give someone that power, if I could just slap the crap out of you, press rinse, repeat, and you would, are you telling me that sociopaths wouldn't want to do that? Of course they would.
Where's your reset button? I want to push it.
I know. How many times have I been reset on this podcast?
Not enough.
Ben A. Fantastic email. Thanks for writing in. The next one comes from Gillian. This is not her full email. She said she wrote it on a couple boxes of wine when she sent this in. So we did truncate it, but it's a really good email. It's a juicy one. She writes, you three are, in my opinion, very intelligent, but how you've royally fucked up this is beyond my understanding, so let's just make this clear before the season finale. So you can tell the boxes of wine are coming through in her email. She says there are 2 incidents that have occurred in the park that we are seeing all at once over 2 of the 3 time frames. Incident 1 is the death of Arnold, and incident 2, the incident that almost shut down the park, and she's labeling this the critical failure. And she writes and she lists facts pertaining to each incident. Incident 1, which is the death of Arnold. Arnold's death took place 34 years 47 days, blah, 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 hours ago. See Dolores' talk with Ford via episode 5. Arnold's death took place prior to the park's opening. See Logan's chat with William via episode 2. The guy died right before the park opened. Arnold's death took place by the hands of Dolores. See Dolores' heartbreaking realization when remembering her talks with Arnold. I killed you, episode 9. Incident 2, which is the incident that almost shut down the park, the critical failure, she's labeling this. Shortly after the park opened, an incident occurred, and she references Teresa's talk with Bernard in episode 1, 2, or 3, she can't remember, where Bernard specifies that a critical incident took place 30 years ago. The critical failure took place when the park was operating with guests because simple math would deduce that 34 years does not equal 30. And as we've explained, T30, T34. Now follow along. Arnold is killed by Dolores in the park. That's a fact. The flashbacks we are seeing of Dolores and Teddy going on a Rambo-style killing spree in the church town Escalante is most likely where Arnold meets his demise. This is assumption. But that first incident would have taken place before the park was open to the public, which is a fact, and in the city filled with sand, which is all where the church is, also named Escalante. The critical failure that took place could not be happening during William and Logan's time period, since William walks on top of the town buried in sand, Church Escalante. Therefore, this Rambo rampage with Dottie, I don't know who Dottie is. That supposed to be Dolores?
Yeah,
Dodie. Couldn't have happened during William and Dolores' visit to the park. And then she did a little Reddit, too long DR. Incident 1 is the death of Arnold. The critical failure. Incident 2 is something that happens during T30, which is William and Dolores' visit at the park, which we have no flashbacks of yet, or maybe we did, but it isn't the church town massacre. I like this idea, guys. I like this idea. And I messaged her back. I was like, does this mean the movie, we've seen the Yul Brynner character down there in cold storage, does that mean the movie is canon and we have yet to see the critical failure? Or is the critical failure something else?
Well, here's my problem with this. In the incident that we see where Wyatt shoots the general, there doesn't appear to be guests in the park. I don't know why we're getting that there's 2 incidents.
No, she says that. She says that. She says T34, there's no guests in the park. That's the death of Arnold.
Correct, but then why would there be another incident 4 years later? You don't think that the park, if they have 2 major, catastrophes within a 4-year period, that they're going to get shut down?
I think that the question that's being raised is that Bernard says 30 years ago. Now, to me, he was just estimating. He wasn't saying 34. He was saying 30 years ago. But it remains to be seen, is there an incident that happens? And I think there's got to be. During William and Logan's stay there, something has got to happen. So you've got the first incident, which is the death of Arnold. Not calling that the incident. I'm sorry. The first critical failure. The first incident. Then there's the critical failure. And so I think that the message here that Gillian is saying is that essentially the critical failure has been characterized as something that happened when the park was fully operational. Not expressly said, but it sounds like it was. And also, there's got to be some sort of end to William and Logan's timeline, right? Or time frame, a reason why that story is being told. Now, obviously, there's William's relationship to Dolores, but we're given so much more about that area. We're given, El Lazo and the Confederados, and there's something about to happen there. And I think that's what she's pointing to, is that we don't know what that something is, but there are 2 distinct incidents. We've seen the death of Arnold. We have yet to see this other thing that happened.
Yeah, and we've been given little breadcrumbs along the way in terms of the narrative when we hear that the man in black was the one who saved the park, right? If we subscribe to the idea that Man in Black is William, something must have happened, to Gene's point, during their time frame 30 years ago for the park to be on the brink of failure, with the exception of William coming in and being the white hat, saving the park for the last 30 years. It would make sense. I agree with you. We'd be assuming, we'd be theorizing on what that critical failure is, the incident 2, what that is.
I don't think you need a critical failure. William, Man in Black, he has feelings for Dolores. If something terrible happens to Dolores, if either Logan and Dolores get killed, that's enough for him to want to save the company. The company we see is already struggling from mismanagement of Pariah. It doesn't have to be a catastrophic event that he saves the company from. The company could easily be on the edge. And once he's found Dolores' love, something happens that separates them. I think that's enough for him to invest in the company to try to keep them afloat and keep coming back for 30 years and trying to reconnect with his love and awaken Dolores. You don't need another catastrophe. We already see we have a catastrophe coming here. At Ford's narrative, shit's going to go down. If you have a park that in roughly, 40 years, you have 3 major incidents, this is like a traveling gypsy carnival where the roller coaster once you have a roller coaster jump the track and kill 5 kids, they're going to get shut down. They rebrand, go to another state. 3 in 30 years? Hell no.
No offense to the proud Roma people. He wasn't talking about you. It was just a figure of speech.
Yeah, I think the correct term is carnies.
No, I just mean, the carnivals that pick up and travel around. They're not, manned by gypsies. It's actually, I believe, just a traveling carnival.
To the ladies, when Dick said manned, he meant operated by, not to disparage your abilities.
I hate you both.
Gillian, thanks so much for writing in. Great email. The next one comes from our friend Vic D. Vic D writes, building upon the last Telegraph segment about how the show could keep going, I want to point out that all TV shows have an engine. This is constantly running or repeating baseline storytelling device that drives every episode and that viewers come to expect. It's the hook and the reason why they watch the show. With that in mind, what's Westworld's engine? And he says 2 things. Number 1, futuristic thriller, espionage, corporate intrigue centered around artificial intelligence. And the second engine, Old West amusement park. Both of these things need to remain in place in some aspect going forward. The corporate intrigue aspect is simple enough to keep going, as an AI rebellion would logically lead out into the real modern world. I can't imagine this show, already one of the most expensive ever, could take on even more budgetary concerns of creating an entire futuristic society that characters will travel in, but you never know. Based on the Times Square photo, things might not be that different than present day. The Old West stories are a more difficult thing to justify going forward. Once we get to the end of the season and presumably solve the maze and discover what the incident was and get some sort of forward progression on the AI uprising, the Westworld amusement park itself seems completely pointless from both an internal and external standpoint. What viewer is going to want to see just more Old West loops when there's an AI uprising to follow? So my solution is that by the end of the season, we see that most or all the Westworld staff, those who make rotations, are AI like Bernard. I think our hint is Elsie going on vacation. This is probably what has happened on a regular basis so no one notices. From a practical show standpoint, we'll see this play out with Elsie returning from vacation with no memory of what happened in the theater, or at least professing not to know, which will be the viewer's cue that she's now in the same state as Bernard, as being nonchalant about something we know was a big deal to them previously. The upshot of this, and the upshot of the power play Charlotte is making, and the maze is that next phase of the AI will be triggered. By the end of the season, all the AI will know they are AI, and led by Maeve and maybe inspired by Dolores, they will realize they need to take the next steps to ensure their own survival. They will have likely killed Charlotte and possibly Ford, assuming he's human and is running counter to wanting AI to be self-aware, and they are in control of Westworld. But there's not nearly enough of them to do anything yet, so they can't reveal themselves. I like this idea. Gene, what do you think?
What's interesting to me is that idea that, we've all been like, oh, God, I hope Elsie's okay. What happened to Elsie? And not thinking that Elsie might actually just be a host that knows too much, that might be getting, maybe this happens all the time at Westworld. You get swiped out, wiped out, and put back. Now, with the normal host that's in the park and operating, you can do that all the time because it wouldn't rouse suspicion, right? Text would work on them and you'd say, no problem. But if you saw your coworker being worked on next door, that might freak you out a little bit. Wait, what's going on here? So this may be actually the method that they use, maybe even with Stubbs, where they take them to a remote facility or somewhere else in the park, clean them out, and put them back out there. Maybe they've seen too much. Now, it does beg the question: can they not do that remotely, or couldn't Ford do it with a snap of his fingers? Apparently not. If we're correct in this email from Victor.
Well, we know that after Westworld, there was the there was the story of Future World, and Future World did not involve Westworld at all. In fact, they had closed the park Westworld, and there was like, I think 1 or 2 references to it. Like there was an incident and they got to shut it down. Do you think that we're going to see additional worlds in this futuristic theme park? So think like Disney World, where they have Epcot, Magic Kingdom, Animal Kingdom. What's the other one I'm missing? Oh, MGM Studios, or what's now Disney Hollywood Studios. Like, do we think that there's a future world, a Roman world, a medieval world, and a West world, and we're going to transition to new parks in upcoming seasons?
First of all, it's a very thorough tour of Disney properties, and I appreciate that, Roger. I think the audience would largely dismiss that as being really, really lazy. Like, what are we going to do next season? Oh, well, crap. We'll do the same thing, but it's going to be in a different, it's going to be a Roman world now. Honestly, when I saw the 1973 movie, I thought, wow, they really didn't need to create the different worlds. Just stick with one. Here's the thing: it is a question, and I'll pose it to you guys. If the show is after this season leaves the park, if it's no longer about Westworld itself and is about this other world that exists outside of Westworld, if there is one. Is that still interesting? Does it still is that second engine, the Old West Amusement Park, critical to the success of the show? Is it a reason why you watch it or other people watch it?
No, I think that the park is just a backdrop to the questions that were raised about morality, about what is it to be alive. You could do that on any backdrop, and that's why Westworld, medieval world, it was all the same story with different window dressing. I wouldn't want it necessarily to go outside the park because it adds too many other influences and the concepts become a bit muddy. But I would follow it as long as they still ask those questions that keep drawing us back. I'm completely fine wherever it takes place.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Vic's got a very valid point, guys, and we've seen emails similar to this. There, where can they progress? Like, are we going to be satisfied going back to Westworld? We almost know everything there is to know about Westworld from a theme park perspective.
I think we'll be looking back 4 seasons from now, 3 seasons from now, and this storyline will seem so basic. This is just the start. Basically, is that where we are right now? It may be it's just the setup. It's not. We're not anywhere near the end of this, and I think people need to. I mean, mark my words on this one. You're going to look back at this season and go, "Oh, that was just the really tiny stuff." They haven't even gotten to the horrifying stuff yet. They haven't gotten to the huge stuff yet, and it will. I think the show will get better and better. I think season 2 is going to be even better than season 1.
Thanks, Vic, for writing in. The next telegraph comes from William T. William T. writes in, I am a software engineering student, and one of the interesting things we recently were made aware of is that the hard drive in a computer is actually double the size of what is advertised. This is needed because of the way a hard drive disk stores data. When you delete a file, it doesn't actually go away. The data is still on the disk, but the reference to where that data is stored is taken away. It also isn't overwritten because the drive simply maps to another portion of the drive to fill the gap. This technique is used so that the information is recoverable using forensic tools, and the extra space serves as backup in case an error occurs in that block or if you need to shift the data from one place to another. This seems interesting in the case of the Westworld host Brains, because it would seem that with a nearly infinite amount of storage space, the data that has been wiped is never actually overwritten, but the reference to it is taken away. This could explain a lot of things that are going on with the host memories, example, not being able to determine the metadata associated with the memory, such as time and place. Also, the Reverie would seem to work as sort of a forensic tool that allows the host to cross-reference data only by association because the direct reference is lost, but that data has linked references to certain keywords, images, or sounds. In the case of Maeve, she has a complete control of her hard disk and can see that there is something there just out of her reach. This showing that she can scan her disk and see the data, but she cannot read the data because she doesn't know what kind of data it is. This is also true with any computer. You can see that there is something there, but until you know the structure of it, it doesn't make any sense because you need a cross-reference to put it into context. I.e., she knows exactly that she was built for a specific purpose, but the reference to where that information has been stored is not available to her. Not that it doesn't exist, but that she needs a cross-reference to it. So basically what he's saying is, I need a new hard drive for my MacBook Pro because it almost crashed before recording this.
I think that's exactly what William was getting at. No, here, this is really smart, actually. You know, we know from the scene with Abernathy in cold storage that their storage capacity is massive. It's more than any computer that's on site. The hosts have just a tremendous amount of storage capacity. In that sense, when you delete something, when you wipe something, the only way that you're going to remotely get rid of it is if you actually overwrite it. So you would have to, like, when you wipe somebody, you have to fill them with just as much data to take up their entire storage space. Otherwise, you're not really erasing it. All you're doing is removing the access points to it, right? The reference points. And so in that case, all that stuff is still up there. Everything that's ever happened to a host is probably still up there. It's just not having the reference points. And once they have something, again, like he says, like a piece of music or a site, or a sound, something that triggers it, that's why you get these blips and pops of memory. It makes complete sense. I think it's a brilliant email.
There's very little difference between this and human memory. How many times is it that a piece of music will trigger where you were, what you were doing, smells, complete surroundings? You have the data, but you just don't have a way to access it. And we see that the hosts are very much structured like a traditional computer today. When Maeve has her incident where she's crashing after the death of her daughter, Bernard pulls out his tablet, and you can actually see in the bottom right where it says that they've hit a fragmentation limit to where her hard drive is so fragmented that she's crashing. So it would make complete logical sense that what William is saying, that they would be structured in this way, and that even without the reveries, all of their memories and experiences are there. You just got to find a way to access them.
But is this why you also want to take a drill to any hard drive that you are done with, so that no one can find your personal information and use it against you?
This could very well be. Remember the old tape cassettes?
Yes.
If you wanted to record over a tape cassette, you'd put the little piece of tape over the tab, right?
Yeah.
This could just simply be like that plug, that it's not that they're drilling the hard drive, but there's some other mechanism in there that kind of will render them hobbled, so that you're not destroying the computer, but you're destroying some other component that essentially takes them offline. You're unplugging the hard drive. You're not destroying it.
So when they're taking the drill up the nose, they're just turning off their consciousness?
No, you're just essentially disconnecting them. We saw Peter Abernathy get drilled, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, we did.
But yet, Charlotte is using him as a courier for all the data. So we know his entire cerebral, memory, his cortex works. So the drilling doesn't affect the mind's capabilities. The drilling does some other...
It just takes them offline.
I think that's what it is, because there's no problem with Peter holding, a ton of data. You wouldn't use him as a courier to get him out the park if he was not functioning properly. Imagine if Charlotte uses him to get data out of the park. He gets to the corporate headquarters and the data's corrupted. You wouldn't risk it.
That's true. Thanks, William. Great email. Thanks for writing in. The next one comes from our friend Jill G. Jill G writes in, because Angela worked as a greeter host, she's a host who knows she's a host. She even stated as much to William when she said, if you can't tell, does it matter? All of the hosts in the park live in this little bubble where Westworld is their only world, but because she's been outside the entrance, Angela knows it's a theme park, and she knows why guests are there and all that goes into running the park as a park. As a first-generation host, she is having the same memory resurgence as Maeve, who has seen her daughter, and Dolores, seeing her time with William, but Angela is seeing her time as a greeter, seeing herself as a greeter, and also seeing and understanding the big picture of what exactly Westworld is. She knows that there are guests who come to kill and rape and play the Black Cat. She has this intense meta level of insight into everything. She's also incredibly clever. She managed to figure out a loophole around the host can't kill guest rule with the man in black, although he ultimately got out of that situation. I loved to see her bulk apperception level. Thoughts?
She's the perfect host. She's the answer key. When the other hosts become aware, they question their reality. They don't know what's going on. She has all the answers. If she became completely aware, she knows the inner workings of the park. She knows the purpose. She knows the entire operation, what it's there for. if you have like Maeve or them become aware, they have limited knowledge. She could provide all the information that the host would need to rebel. She's feeding them all the answers.
Did you guys get from the Man in Black horse and noose scene? Did you get that was Angela's way of killing him without killing him?
No, I actually didn't, because I was thinking to myself, if the horse was mechanical, if it was a robot host, wouldn't it be programmed with the Good Samaritan and not pull the rope to kill the Man in Black?
I thought that too, but then you got to remember it's a horse. So who's to say that the horses are built as with as much cognitive abilities as the humans, right? You would think it would be a waste of resources, because why would a horse really need to think that much? And in that sense, it might be the sort of thing where they never programmed the horse to understand, or it's never been in a situation to learn for itself to understand that walking away from a person with a rope around their neck is going to kill that person.
I thought it was like a Rube Goldberg machine. You were killing without effectively doing it yourself. The horse would never endanger a human, but the horse would never, like you said, pulling the rope would never go against his Good Samaritan. So this was a way of setting up all the dominoes to kill the Man in Black without violating her Good Samaritan.
Also, a lot of other people wrote in about Angela. Gillian did, and some other people did as well. They basically saying that do not overlook Angela, that Angela might be one of those things where they focus the camera on so many other characters that she's overlooked. And in fact, she's the one that could be key to anything serious going on, right? Like while we're focused on Maeve, you've got this other, possibly sentient host who also knows, like you guys said, everything that's going on in the park, has an idea of the inner workings, and happens to be teamed up with some of the most, dangerous and ruthless creatures, for lack of a better word, in Westworld.
The next email telegraph comes from Dustin H. Dustin H. writes in, I'll try to keep this quick for the sake of your sanity. The Man in Black states in episode 2 that he appreciates Westworld more than the real world because the real world is chaos. Things are happenstance. But in Westworld, everything matters. Everything you see and experience is a decision. Put it another way, it is intelligently designed. So now he's on a quest to turn off God mode so the simulation never crosses the uncanny valley into feeling truly real. The Man in Black, this titan of industry and therefore science presumably, wants to abandon the real world for one that is unambiguously handcrafted by a creator and therefore drenched with meaning from every bullet to every blade of grass. He's essentially searching for God. And you can empathize with him. You may not agree, but you can see why he wants this. There is a deep metaphor here about the dichotomy between science and religion, and about whether the never-ending quest for more and more technology is really the correct way for it. It brings to mind something asked by the character Palmer Joss in the movie Contact. Is the world fundamentally a better place because of science and technology? I'm both an atheist and a technologist, and this storyline is giving me a goddamn existential crisis. I would love to hear y'all chew on this. I'm sure you have some even deeper insights to share. And then he ends the email with a quote from William Faulkner. It goes, "You cannot swim for new horizons until you have courage to lose sight of the shore." So guys, what do we think about this?
To me, this rings true. Basically, the idea that as we've gone forward with science, if you look hundreds of years ago, they had many gods, right? There was a god for every natural occurrence. There was a god for luck. There was a god for, whatever. As science has progressed, we've gone to basically, for the most part, monotheistic religions where God only presides over death now, essentially. That's the last frontier. We haven't gotten there yet. Everything else has been covered, right? So we can explain weather patterns now. We can explain why the harvest is good or bad. And so all those things, go away. And in a world, presumably, 100 years from now, 80 years from now, they'll figure it out even more. And the more science figures out, the less you believe in anything of substance in the sense of meaning, right? So again, if man's intrinsic hunt is for meaning, then you look in this world and there's less and less meaning, right? And so the Man in Black in searching for that, why does he prefer Westworld to the outside world? Because everything has its place. Everything makes sense. Everything adds up to something. And in the real world, unfortunately, it doesn't.
Yeah, I think also religion provides people with a lot of comfort. It makes them feel secure in that things are not happenstance. Things happen for a reason. They follow some grand plan. And I think as technology advances and religion kind of falls to the wayside, where things can be explained now through science, and you're essentially pulling the shroud back on explaining the world's mysteries, I think you're going to have a large part of the population that feels lost, that they feel, their purpose is lost. And the second thing here, I'm embarrassed to say this, but Contact I kind of enjoyed. And there's besides Palmer Joss referencing Occam's razor, he does have a quote that I like. The second half of Contact's garbage, but there are some good questions asked. They asked Palmer Joyce, what if you could meet the aliens? What question would you ask them? And he says, I'm paraphrasing now because it's been years I've seen it, but he says something to the effect, how did you survive your own technological advances? Because the same advances that help us, extend life, travel into space, they could also easily create the situation of our own demise. So how do we survive technological advances? And I think that's a question that's raised by the show. It's raised by things around us today, and it's something that we should all be aware of.
Also, go see the movie Arrival, because I think it answers this question. It's a fantastic movie, and they don't hide behind the image of Jodie Foster's father. They actually show aliens trying to communicate, and spoiler alert, it's the world working together. How do we survive these technological advances? By coming together as a world and using those for the greater good instead of destroying each other. Thanks, Dustin, for writing in. The next telegraph comes from Zoltan. By the way, fantastic name. If that's your true name, Zoltan, the best. He says, one of you guys called forward a psychopath a few podcasts ago, referencing what he said about both hosts and humans. He said there is no consciousness at all, and all human qualities, including intelligence, are merely peacock feathers helping us to mate. Apart from killing a human, his views are right. When writing Ford, the creators clearly did a lot of research on modern psychology based on the modular brain model. This model tells us that we can associate pretty much every single thing we think, want, or act on with the brain module. This conscious self is also a brain module located in the left hemisphere right next to our language center, and its purpose is to create a narrative, create our story, and explain to ourselves why we did certain things. It allows us to look at ourselves as a whole, as a single person. But as Ford said, that is just an illusion. Some years ago, using fMRI machines in a series of experiments, it was proven that the conscious self module activates after a decision was made. In short, what we think we are actually activates after we act or make a decision. And this has very little influence on the decision-making mechanisms of our brains. That is why it is very difficult for an adult person to change. Laziness, willpower, these things don't exist. These are just words we make up to explain why we don't act the way we want to act. Our decision-making mechanisms, our subconscious mind, works not unlike that of the hosts. We were programmed since birth out of experiences. We live in loops and have no real power to break free. We do have the illusion of it, though, much like Dolores and Maeve do. Guys, this I got to tell you, this email kind of makes me sad.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm a sucker for a tragic story, and this is one of the key points again of Westworld that I really love is this idea that it's calling into question what we are, what our story is, and what that really means. But I love this fact that your self narration, that conscious self, is actually responding to the things you're doing. It's like sitting in the back seat and you do the thing, and then your conscious self explains the story of why you did it. And it's a great theory in psychology that people might mistake it for absolving people of responsibility, which I don't think it does, but it helps answer that question: how could someone do what they did? Well, their narrative, their conscious mind, their narrative, it will warp the facts of what happened in order to make it match something that's acceptable in their own mind.
I expect an email of this quality and this depth to come from someone named Zoltan.
Oh, this is a classic Zoltan.
Right. Classic Zoltan. Thank you so much for writing in. And he actually goes in depth. This was just part of his email, but you can see his full email on shatontv.com in our Westworld Telegraph section. The next email comes from Julius G. Julius writes, "We know that William's life in real life was marked by ambition, hard work, and denying his deeper humanity in order to climb the corporate ladder. Thus, why his imagination and books felt more real to him. His upcoming marriage to Logan's sister isn't for love, but what is expected of him. It's part of that corporate climb. Yet, he's innately decent, not for show, but innate. He helps host off the ground for no gain. He falls in love with Dolores partially because she's breaking her behavioral loop just as he is in himself. In essence, both of them are using Westworld to become more human, so for him to become the Man in Black violates both what he wants to become, but also the way humans act in general. Humans don't change that way. Changes in real life are small and gradual in functioning human beings. Massive, sudden changes much more likely lead to actual breakdowns in people that could take years to recover, if ever. So for William to be the Man in Black, he would have had to be a sociopath from the beginning, and the show did not show us a sociopath. You don't become one without at least exhibiting signs of narcissism and a lack of empathy. Even using the example of how people act in war, that war behavior of violence, it remains isolated to that time in their life, or if it comes out post-war, it's sporadic and uncontrolled, marked prior by depression, anxiety, and other marks of mental stress, or even severe illness. The Man in Black actions are all controlled with a clear goal. So those who argue William becomes so traumatized by something in the next 2 episodes ignore actual human behavior and consequences of such trauma. Also, there's the notion of theme. All of those plot and character developments should have an ultimate meaning. The show, in episode 1, makes its disdain very clear regarding human evil. The sympathy is all with the host, and the view of humanity is exceedingly dark and cynical. It's only in episode 2 when we meet an actually clearly decent human being. Yes, sure, there are other characters, especially those played by Jeffrey Wright, that have nuance and kindness. But again, it appears Wright is playing 2 different characters. His actions become less clear. Thus, we are only left with William as a clear audience point of view character. If William turns evil, what does that give the show narratively and thematically? That, yep, all humans are evil and irredeemable. Whip-de-doo. We got that in the first minutes of the show. So there would be no point for these hours watching the show. On the other hand, and if not the major theme that has been evolving since the first episode, is what is consciousness and what is sentience. If William, and I assume William's death, plays a major part in the host Dolores' pathway through the maze to consciousness, then that would make thematic sense. William would exit for an actual reason rather than some superficial cool plot thing.
We're talking here about gradual change. We're seeing William 30 years in the past. Whatever event will happen that ends the season will obviously be traumatic, but there's also 30 years of gradual change that has shaped the Man in Black that we see now. The Man in Black describes himself as, before the entire Maeve incident with her child, he had played it straight. He'd played it white hat. We don't know what other outside influences have changed him, whether it's the corporate structure at work or the real world continuing to where he has to live an alternate life that's not genuine to who he is at the core. So I think these changes could easily be explained over 30 years. And we're assuming just because we haven't seen them yet, I don't think the story has been told yet. Season 2 could easily fill in the holes that explain the Man in Black's journey, if he is William, from William to the Man in Black we know, and explain that later on.
Building on that, I would also say that, when we say that all humans are evil and irredeemable, that we learned from the first minutes of the show, I think that the Man in Black, his motivations, may not necessarily be evil and irredeemable. Like he may be onto something that we don't quite understand yet, and he's intimated several times that there's a bigger picture there, that he's going for something else. Interestingly, we had another writer who wrote in, Alex, who said that basically. When Dolores is confronted with the Man in Black in the church at Escalante, she's terrified. that interaction might indicate that the man in black has not been coming to the park, all the time. So it would kind of negate that idea that they've been living the second life together, and that, it seems, and I agree with that. It seems when she sees the man in black in the church that she calls out, it's a question, William, and he seems to give a little nod and then says, "Hello, Dolores." And then she's horrified. I think that expression is how horrified she is at what he has become, that she now realizes that man, she's seeing clearly now, and she's seeing that she's connecting the two things, and it's and really that's more terrifying than someone who's been terrorizing you all along. That you're used to, It's that realization that it's somebody that you maybe used to love.
Well, I think that Alex points this out. The other listener who wrote in that just gave that little bit of factoid. He also points out that Jimmy Simpson isn't coming back, or is at least not listed on IMDb for season 2. But Ben Barnes is.
I worry. Hold on. I worry about this. We've had people write in. Some people consider it spoilers. By telling them who's picked up for season 2, that they're going to continue on. I wouldn't go there.
However, just because it's listed on IMDb doesn't make it gospel,
right?
And in addition, for instance, Game of Thrones, people thought that Jon Snow was done. Kit Harington says, "I'm not in this next season,"
right?
And then he comes right back. I mean, it doesn't really mean anything. It's more a hint. I think. And honestly, on the deep dive, I said that Ed Harris is on for season 2,
right?
So I mean, again, I think that it's. And here's the thing: you don't know what capacity they're used in, even
exactly.
Ben Barnes could be in just in flashbacks. I don't know. To me, it's not an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to leave that in there. If the listeners feel different, please tell us.
If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably searching out spoilers for yourself. I gotta say, Alex and Julius, as much as your email was really good and thoughtful, so far we've seen that the simplest answers are the right ones. So William is Man in Black, but we'll see. Thanks for writing in. Our next Telegraph email comes from Scott B. Scott B writes in, "Love the show. Great commentary. I come out of computer science and biology with no experience in literature, film, or theater. I find those areas of your show to be the most thought-provoking. Regarding the biology of the hosts and the fact that they can live without oxygen and seem to tolerate the loss of blood, I would suggest that an explanation for the host's ability can be found in extending the pool of what is possible beyond humans. For example, you could ask, how long can a human live without oxygen? The answer? About 12 minutes without using supplemental O2. Or, how long can a human live without water? The answer is about 3 days. I would suggest a different question. Given this is the future and that the hosts are built, I would suggest we look at the entire animal kingdom when asking what is possible. For example, there are bacteria that live without any oxygen, and there are desert animals that never drink water. Humans evolved and do not represent the best that nature has to offer. We are a product of random chance. There are other animals that do what we do better, faster, live longer, and can even regrow appendages. It is reasonable to think that Ford spliced in the genes of other animals when creating the hosts. Just my 2 cents, Scott. We also must point out that another listener that wrote in, a physician, Brian the doctor, said that the best guess is that they are made of synthetic tissue that is made to be human-like for realism, but is still organic. People are, still trying to create this stuff in real life. And in fact, in the opening credits, they show the host being created using a machine. That tissue probably doesn't decay as easily when the hosts have no blood like a human tissue would. The hosts seem to need blood either because they actually need it to run or they are programmed to be shut down without it. My guess is they need it like a car needs oil, and they are programmed to shut down if they lose too much or lose it too fast to prevent severe damage to themselves. The blood could also contain an energy source that needs to be refilled after a certain amount of time. Human blood contains glucose, which is sugar, which gives our muscles energy to move. But they could also contain a battery, and that the blood is an oil-like substance that helps them move. Or the blood could just be for show only. He's not sure, but I agree that the newer hosts have an organic material in them. So Scott suggests that there's different animal spliced genes that are happening in the hosts. Brian, the physician, suggests that it's more human-based, but maybe using some mechanical features like oil and stuff. That's the reason for it. What do you guys think? Which camp are you in?
I mean, we see that clearly hosts don't die, I mean, if you shoot them, but they're also, we don't see any, clearly mechanical parts inside them anymore. It would make sense. It's much more feasible. Like, basically, if you could imagine how much a hamburger would cost if we had to make a robot cow every time, right? It's much easier if you could just make an organic thing. Organic material is cheaper, easier to construct. It's more durable, I mean, not more durable than metal, but I mean more in the sense that it's not. It can heal itself, right? Machines to date cannot self-repair. So in that sense, it makes a lot of sense to make them out of things. And then, once, when we say they're biological and someone counters with, well, they're machines, it can be both. One of my friends, Chet, actually brought up the issue that he goes, think of that old sci-fi trope of the biomech, cruising out in space, right? It's biological, but it can also move around in space. It's sci-fi. It's possible that just because something's organic and alive doesn't mean that it's subject to the same survival rules as a human.
Yeah, I could see that. Thanks, Scott and Dr. Brian, for writing in. All right, guys, our last and final Telegraph email comes from Frederick P. Frederick writes in. He says, Dear Roger, Dick, and Gene, with special direction towards Dick, who said in the instant take, but in the end, that's not what I want to focus on or what I want to enjoy. And as I found all these secrets were being revealed, I was sad. I didn't want to be in that conversation. So toward the end, when the performances became more subtle, hopefully we won't have to talk about Man in Black as William. We'll talk about the other things and the beauty of the show as a whole. That's your quote, Big D. He writes, I too was caught up in the mysteries of Westworld, but now I feel guilty. The show is such a beautiful creation, with such attention to detail. I want to spend much more time appreciating the great performances. With that in mind, I have made a first draft of the best written, acted, and or directed moments in the show, but I'm sure this list needs to be tweaked, and I've left off several great performances, but it's a point of departure. And he put the top 4, and this is in reverse order. And you can read the rest of the top 10 on shatontv.com. The first one, Peter Abernathy interrogation in episode 1, the original, with a performance by Lewis Hertham. Did anything sell us on the show more than Lewis Hertham's performance in episode 1 as the crazed Abernathy? I thought for sure he'd be back in a larger role, but he is not. Yet, that's the first one he writes. The second one, Ford misdirects Bernard's questions about Arnold in episode 3, The Stray. Performance by Anthony Hopkins. Hopkins in this scene is incredible. We loved it when it was aired, but now that we know the rest of the story, it's even more impressive. Ford completely misdirects Bernard without ever uttering a lie. Watch Hopkins very carefully as he tells the complete story of Arnold and Westworld with his delivery while simultaneously throwing Bernard off the scent with his words. Consider that Hopkins was given dialogue, but in the end, the dialogue is unimportant. Hopkins' body language, facial expressions, eye movements, and delivery make this entire scene work, and it makes sense when it's all said and done. This is arguably Hopkins' best scene in the show, and in rewatching it, I'm already regretting not placing it higher. Number 3, Man in Black drinks whiskey with Ford in episode 5, Contrapasso, performance by Ed Harris. Seeing Harris and Hopkins together was the highlights of the season, one of the highlights of the season. For the most part, I think Ed Harris's performance has been underrated in Westworld. Like many of the ancillary characters, he was not asked to do much early on. But here, he's in true mid-season form. In this scene, he really begins to flex his acting muscle, and his character becomes even more interesting. Watch the range of emotion he portrays. Like Hopkins, Harris has that ability to project a window into the character's mind through the body language. We suddenly get the sense that he is a lot more complicated than we were led to believe. And number 4, Ford kills Teresa in episode 7, Trompe l'oeil. Performances by Anthony Hopkins. I end with the same scene I began with. Anthony Hopkins gives what is possibly his best performance of the season in the stunning scene. As always, Hopkins uses every muscle to bring his character to life. His performance is aided by the fantastic repartee with actress Sidney Babbitt. Hopkins turns ordinary scripted dialogue into a stained glass window. I really like this, and I can see why you chose this email. And again, there's 6 more areas. You can see that on Shat on TV, but I can see why you would want this email, Gene, because so far, and we've fallen into that trap, and I'm probably the worst on this podcast of being too involved in the theories that we forget how great this show is from an acting standpoint, and these actors are at the top of their game.
One of the things we do a lot on this show is when we do the Instacast, it'll bring a lot of stuff to mind. Then we go back and we research it before the deep dive. And so Roger and Dick and I will go and we pull back video. What did he say exactly? Were those his exact words? Where were they standing? What's in the background? We're looking at all this stuff over and over and over again. This email was the first time that I went back and actually watched these scenes and really just chewed on those scenes and really just savored those scenes. And honestly, the first time I watched them, I was watching them with an eye for live tweeting. The second time I watched them, I was watching them with an eye for taking notes and doing research. And maybe if I watched them a third time, it was to refute something that someone wrote on YouTube about how we were wrong about something. And this is the first time I went back and looked at it and said, God damn, this is a really good TV show. This is just fun to watch. And more than that is that Abernathy's scene, it broke my heart the first time I saw it. It still does.
Broke my heart? No, that terrified me. I went back and watched it again, where he starts talking about these mechanical hands, and he says, you'll pay for it. And he says basically that they'll both pay for it, and looks at Dr. Ford, and now we know why he's looking at Bernard. And just the way he gives him that side glance, horrifying. More than the words he's saying, that look and that he conveys it. But I just want to add one more that we've had recently. I think in the last episode, Dolores alone, sitting in that room having the conversation with her memory of Arnold, where she's walking herself through, why can't you help me? Because you're dead, because I killed you. Amazing, like the range of emotion you can convey just in those slight facial movements. And only a skilled actress could have pulled that off. It could have easily come across as hammy and cheesy and over the top, and I think she executed it beautifully. But I really want to, thank who wrote this?
That was Frederick.
Yeah, I really want to thank Frederick for pulling out that quote. You actually made me sound quite intellectual, which is surprising. But I was glad that didn't get lost, because in the Instacast, a lot of times we focus on the big themes, what went on, and I was glad that you picked up on that, because I think we really should be looking at it for what it is. The show is a piece of art. It's something that's beautiful. It's like I said, I think I said that after that quote was, it's not, horses and having sex. It's the beautiful relationships out of the core of the show. So I don't want us to miss that. And I hope the show doesn't lose that going forward, because that's what I love about it.
There's also a YouTube site, and the channel escapes me, but I watched it this week. And what he did is he took 30 minutes and he broke down a 4-minute scene. And the scene was with Dr. Ford and Teresa. And he focuses on the script and how, in all his infinite knowledge and experience and wisdom of being such a skilled actor, Anthony Hopkins breaks down the script into a much more meaningful experience than what's just written in the page. And you can't get there without the type of experience that he had. So when he's sitting there, he's having the power lunch scene with Teresa. There's so much going on in just a paragraph of dialogue. And those are the little things that make Westworld, in my opinion, one of the best shows on TV in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think when they can get you to share the emotion that the actors on stage are feeling. The last one I want to go back to was the Jeffrey Wright scene, when Maeve essentially makes him realize a second time that he's a host, and he starts to have a panic attack. And in the past, Dr. Ford could calm him down and could kind of reset him. Maeve just lets him go. She says, I know you're in there. If you're going to go find the truth, find the whole truth. And his panicked attack as he's walking down, the hallways that he's walked down thousands of times, but now through the lens that he knows he's one of the hosts that he sees being worked on. The terror, and he finally has to lean up against that pillar and looks around, like a child who's lost their parents in the middle of the city. I felt that panic, and it was great. When a show can make you feel that when you're sitting on your couch.
Yeah, that YouTube channel is actually, it's the Nerd Writer. Go check it out. I highly recommend it. It's not a 30-minute clip. It's actually an 8-minute clip, but it's fantastic. It's entitled Westworld: What Makes Anthony Hopkins Great. And again, that you can just search on YouTube. It's the Nerd Writer. Gentlemen, great. Gene.
Thank you.
Fantastic job. Thank you, listeners who wrote in. I know we have over 100 entries this week, so make sure you check it out on shatontv.com. There's a comment section. You can review and respond. You can see all the pictures. You can see the Telegraph emails in their full, unedited, untruncated versions and respond to them. Yeah, guys, what else is... I know this is episode 10. This is a little bit, I don't know if I have words for it. I'm a little sad.
Yeah, I'm glad they're giving us an extra half hour to really say goodbye this Sunday. Just a reminder to everyone too, if you only allow yourself an hour for the to watch Westworld, give yourself 90 minutes this week. It also means that the Instacast will probably be out a little later than usual, but we're going to try to get out to you immediately once we've picked ourselves up off the floor. Expect us to be ranting, basically, with no logic to what we're saying at that point. I expect huge things. I think the showrunners know and HBO knows that they got to finish with a bang, and I think that it's all building up to be something huge. Can't wait.
Yep, I just want to thank you all for taking the ride with us. Just like the show, we've had our wild ride. Just, from starting out in the beginning to where we are now, and we appreciate you guys being along the journey with us. And if you get a chance, if you haven't, go to iTunes, leave us a review. It helps us the most, kind of expand our audience and expand the community. And it's something we take pride in, and we appreciate you all.
Yeah.
So try to share it.
And a couple things that are upcoming. So we are going to still follow, right, guys? We're going to say for episode 10, we're going to follow the same format that we've been doing all season. We're going to have the Instacast, we'll have a deep dive, and then we'll do a Westworld Telegraph. Yes?
Yeah, and then we're going to follow that with a tour of all the other podcasts.
That's right.
So you can catch us in all your other favorite Westworld podcasts.
Yeah. We a lot of the podcast community, the independent podcast community, has been so great and just fantastic. They've reached out to us and have invited us on their shows and do some cross recording just as a wrap up. So be on the lookout for that. We've got that on the docket. So we're still going to stay busy throughout the end of the year. I think also one of our plans is to, as the three, all watch Future World together and review that and see how that makes connections. I cannot wait for that. As people have said, it is absolutely terrible.
Yeah, and we're also going to do a season recap. So we're going to do, Sundays, Instacast, the other two normal ones that we do, the deep dive and the Telegraph. Then we're also going to do a full, I think, season in review, and we can tie in there, some emails about what we hope for the future.
Also, a humble request: if we could do Future World after I start drinking again, that would be really great. I don't know if I can. After seeing the original Westworld, I don't know if I can handle Future World sober.
When does your 30 days end?
I am on day 17 right now, so I've got 2 weeks to go.
Okay, we got a lot of stuff in between then. We can adjust our schedules. Yeah, so that's what we've got going on with the show. Also, we need to make the announcement soon, guys, with what our next series is going to be. So far, there's 4 strong contenders. I suggest, and you don't have to decide now, but what if we were to put a poll up and let the audience decide?
As long as all the options on the poll are taboo, then I'm cool with it. No, I've looked at some of the ones. The Expanse looks good. Taboo looks amazing. American Gods, I'm familiar with that source material because I've read it before, so that's good too. But man, I got something. We can get on this train right now, guys. That Tom Hardy, he looks good.
The only downside to Taboo, it's a limited series. So it's only going to do one run. Like it's going to be it.
I don't care. I mean, a lot of people have written in and said, "Hey, do Game of Thrones," and I don't want to do I like Game of Thrones, but I don't want to do a show just for numbers. I don't want to do a show just because everyone else does it. I'm more interested in finding a show, I think, that's quality and speaks to us and keeps us entertained, even if it doesn't necessarily have the huge numbers of Game of Thrones. So I think we're looking for a right fit and not just something that would have the most mass appeal.
I would like to point out also, I've had a lot of back and forth with people who are like, yeah, at least Westworld's not Game of Thrones. That show's stupid. Game of Thrones continues to be my favorite thing on television. I don't watch it for analytical purposes and all that stuff, but I think all three of us are Game of Thrones fans. So we're not bagging on the show or anything. It's just, one, it's so late into its cycle, and two, it's not our thing.
Yeah, if we jumped on that train right now, I think that would be cheesy. That would be just a numbers grab. I think the community that's been podcasting about Game of Thrones for the last 7-8 years of whatever it's been are doing a quality job, and I don't think it's us to just jump on that. We love the show. Plus, also, it'd be nice to have a show I really am passionate about, to be able to sit down on Sunday and just watch it and relax.
Well, the only other problem that I have with source material show is that there's going to be book readers, like with American Gods. There's going to be people who already know what's coming. Like, that was my biggest issue with Walking Dead. I've read all the comics. I'm up to date. I know the Negan storyline, right? I know all that. So when I see entire episodes either do the exact same storyline or fuck up an entire storyline, it's not fun for me. So how could I do an entire podcast if I already know what's coming without letting that out the bag?
Yeah, how crappy would Westworld be if they just did a 10 episode series that was the movie broken into 10 parts?
Yeah.
Even with all the effects in the world, you already know it.
Exactly. So, all right, that does it for this week's episode of The Telegraph. Join us on Sunday when we release our Instacast right after episode 10. Then on Tuesday for our deep dive analysis, and then followed up on Thursday with the final Westworld Telegraph. Be sure to follow us on social media. We're everywhere. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, everywhere basically that is social media. We're on it. Be sure to follow us, share it with friends. We do a live tweeting every episode airing of the East Coast of America. Also, download and subscribe to our podcast wherever fine podcasts can be found. Leave a review wherever you get your podcasts emailed to you or sent to you. And if you want to be a contributor on the Westworld Telegraph, email your emails to hosts@shatontv.com. And finally, we have very limited remainders of our Westworld t-shirts. Please go to our website, click on the store, and you can find our 3 designs. They're black. They're awesome. It's the Pyramid of Consciousness. It's the Maze. And it's Dolores Abernathy's farm t-shirt with milk for growing boys. So get your t-shirt. We'll ship that out before Christmas if you place an order. Anything else I've left off, gentlemen? Or can we shut this down and get ready for episode 10?
Shut her down.
On behalf of my 2 co-hosts, Gene Lyons and Big D, I almost forgot your names there for a minute. My name is Roger Roper. I will see you on Sunday. Get ready. Final episode of Westworld. Take care. Be safe. Be good to animals. Be good to each other. And be good to robots.